like 2 nights ago, my husband and I were watching a show, and we like to pause halfway through and make tea in for the evening. So, and he likes Earl Grey. He's a big fan. I am too. Well, he's fixing his Earl Grey tea, and he puts some milk in it, coconut milk. Now, my husband, we've been married 26 years, and I have never before seen him put milk in his tea. I always have. I've always taken my tea with milk and maybe a little sweetener, maybe not. He has always added exactly 4 teaspoons of sugar to his giant mug of Earl Grey tea. I've fixed it for him that way, as well as I've watched him make it that way always. And so I remarked, I said, "Oh, you're drinking milk in your tea now." He looked at me so strangely. He said, "I've been doing this for like 6 months now."
A very warm welcome. I am with Donna McMurtry today, and we will be discussing basic Q&A on timelines. I know there will be a roundtable published in the week of Quantum Realms, where we are celebrating quantum healing and also Dolores Cannon's birthday. And hopefully you are able to tune into some of those videos. Tune into the timeline roundtable, which will be more in depth. But today, Donna and I thought we will cover some basic Q&A understandings of what timelines are and how you can use it to benefit you and your life moving forward. Brilliant. So Donna, you are a quantum healer and you have written some amazing books on Atlantis.
Thank you. Yes. Yes, I practice BQH as well as QHHT. And yes, fiction stories set in the most historically probable Atlantis after much, much research, as well as some nonfiction from session stories. So yeah.
Yeah.
And you too are a quantum healer. And you practice other things, though, besides quantum healing, right, Chrisla?
Well, I do a bit of channeling and I do mediumship, which I enjoy very much. I feel with quantum healing, seeing people going under this deep trance or hypnosis state, whatever you can call it, where they find answers to help themselves is amazing. But also when I do channeling and I help people by seeing the things that they don't normally recognize and just reading their energy in that way, is also so much reward in knowing that I can help someone, just giving them a bit of advice, giving them a bit of perspective, which is sometimes we need. And it doesn't matter what modality you use because there's benefit in every one of them.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well said.
So timelines, wow, fascinating subject.
Yeah, and I'm kind of new to it, to be honest. And it's still all big and complex and sometimes overwhelming, but I also think it's super fascinating. And I think it's important to share just the basics of what we mean by timelines and how time serves us and all that kind of stuff.
So what is time and what is timelines? basic Q&A. And even though it sounds so simple, right, it is like you're opening a can of worms at the same time, because we always think the biggest thing, right, instead of keeping it simple.
Yeah. Do you want to give your impressions first, or do you want me to?
Well, timeline for me is just being in the now. Time, the most relevant time, the most relevant now, the most relevant action, feeling that you want to experience that is going to make you feel good. Time is energy, and it's being in the flow, because I feel when we're not in the flow of things, we're resisting it. And in that resistance, we could create what we don't want for ourselves rather than what we do want. So it's always important for me to stay in tune with what you want. But then, trying to explain one thing like time or timelines, even now with me explaining, I feel like I'm venturing off already into different areas of what it can be instead of keeping to the topic and keeping it simple. But yeah, if you think of time and it being an energy and us creating this bubble of this is now my world, right? And when I step out in the bigger world, okay, now I'm creating something bigger with more interaction and more people being able to interact with me and therefore creating more possibilities. So that is kind of mine in short.
I love that. I love that you described it as an energy and as very much an expanding energy that expands and flows with us. And I think the same thing, I think it's a moving energy. I think time is something that we set up to act upon all the other forms of energy, such as you think biological substances. Time is what allows evolution and devolution, right? By acting on our biological bodies, all the things in our biological world. Time to me is an organizer. I love organizational principles. And, without time, we wouldn't have a past and a present and a future. We wouldn't be able to kind of wrap our human minds around how to work in the past, how to work in the present, how to work in the future. As well as I think time is very much a container. Everything, all these energetic interactions, whether it's energy as material or energy as immaterial, everything takes place within time as the container. Yeah, that's my simple explanation of time. I think it's very useful. I also think we're at a point as a collective of humanity where we can start to go beyond time or understand it at a deeper level to work outside of time when we want to. Yeah.
I feel that.
Go ahead.
I feel that because when I'm in meditation, it's as if I can visualize those things that I want to create for myself, like where I want to go. When someone asks you, where do you want to go in 5 years or where do you see yourself? That's often a very difficult question to answer because you cannot, you can easily see the past because you've been there, you've experienced that. But how to experience the unknown? So therefore, putting yourself in that feeling state of how would it feel like if I were to create this for myself, right? And just try and be as specific as possible. And then through that meditation, try and bring it into your energy. And I feel through doing that, you are creating your timeline. You are allowing yourself for that timeline to unfold for you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Mm-hmm. So, what creates multiple timelines then?
Well, here's the little bit I know so far.
Mm-hmm.
Is it seems to be all of our choice points. And of course, the choice point, which we don't really always know what's a big choice point and what's not. We just do these things, make these choices. But the bigger the choice point, the more different the timeline, the stream of time that branches off according to that choice to follow that choice through. So, like for instance, I gave an example of if we wear a blue shirt versus a green shirt one morning. And that may or may not be a significant choice point. That may result in two different timelines that are very, very identical, where we wouldn't even really be able to differentiate other than the color of shirt we had on. Mm. Or that could be a significant choice point where maybe a temporary coworker, somebody at work that we haven't known previously, comments on the green shirt that we wore, which we then strike up a conversation with this person, and maybe we go to lunch with this person, and maybe it leads to having a new best friend or a new lover or somebody that then really impacts our life in some way. So that simple choice could lead to a completely different timeline, or it could lead to one that's very similar. But I think the timelines that we have visited in sessions that are quite different, where different versions of us are living in vastly different places, and we have very different lives. Maybe we're married in one and not in another. We have children in one and not in another. We have different professions. I think those branch off according to, of course, the bigger choice points versus I think we skip across timelines all the time and we just don't realize it. I think that we're blinking in and out of different consciousness streams.
Mm.
And I think we don't recognize it because the timelines, quote unquote, closest to us are so similar. There's such small, tiny differences that we don't always even recognize. We're blinking across all these different streams of consciousness or timelines or reality bubbles.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. When I listen to Bashar, he always says, every time you blink, it's a different reality. So every time you
That's
blink,
wild.
it's a different reality, right? And exactly like you say, sometimes it's so small that you don't even recognize the changes.
Yeah.
But something could be massive. And then that is where timelines start to split off and create their own little life of their own.
Yeah. Here's a silly little example. Like 2 nights ago, my husband and I were watching a show, and we like to pause halfway through and make tea for the evening. And he likes Earl Grey. He's a big fan. I am too. Well, he's fixing his Earl Grey tea, and he puts some milk in it, coconut milk. Now, my husband, we've been married 26 years, and I have never before seen him put milk in his tea. I always have. I've always taken my tea with milk and maybe a little sweetener, maybe not. He has always added exactly 4 teaspoons of sugar to his giant mug of Earl Grey tea. I've fixed it for him that way, as well as I've watched him make it that way always. And so I remarked, I said, "Oh, you're drinking milk in your tea now." He looked at me so strangely. He said, "I've been doing this for like 6 months now." And I was like, "No, you have not." I have no memory of this. And it's such an odd feeling when something like that happens. You feel like am I getting dementia? Am I losing my mind? But I think it's just a different timeline.
Mm.
It's a silly example, but it's weird.
But it's the simple ones that make you question your own state of mind, right? Because
Yeah.
if that happens more than once, you are going to think, what is going on with me, right? Am I losing my mind? And you do have these questions pop up. I've seen them. I've seen people being scared because they're confused with regards to what's happening, or maybe even questioning in spiritual communities, is anyone else experiencing this, because this is what I'm experiencing and this is not normal. So it is being recognized, and I feel this topic is coming up more and more because people are starting to notice the timelines, the differentiations that they are experiencing.
Yes, and as our awareness of it expands, there's always a reason when anything comes into our awareness. When we expand enough to start to notice new things,
Mm.
then eventually we'll get to work with them. We'll learn their purposes and we'll work with these things. And I think that's why
Yeah.
it's coming up for so many of us now. There's purpose to this. There's a way we can use it.
So, okay, so just a question, why would there be multiple timelines? Well, you wrote down, because you sent me the basic Q&A and what you thought it was. And you wrote down, if you're a gamer and you understand how important it is to play the game, right? I would like you to talk a bit more about that, because I think that is an amazing analogy.
Okay. I am not a gamer, but I have sons that are 21 and 23 that have played video games quite a bit. And in watching them and watching this whole culture kind of evolve and expand hugely in the last 5 years, 10 years, it's very important inside of these video games and inside of each level of the game that they have tons of choices, endless choices that they can make inside the game that then leads to something else, to something else. It might lead them to completely different areas in the game, or completely different opponents or battles, or what have you. And it just struck me that that's such a good analogy for why we would have different timelines that we could follow, and why we kind of come back and play the same lifetime, incarnate this same lifetime again and again and again, and live out all these different timelines, is because it's so fun to see, well, what would happen if I made this choice instead of that? Or when I made this choice, what would have happened if I had stayed on the original path? I just thought it was such a good analogy. We do it for the same reason, is because we want our soul, our huge, infinite soul wants so many choices. They don't want just this little 5 choices that we can make. They don't want just this one little timeline. So it makes sense to me
Mm.
because we do this even as humans.
It is a difficult concept to understand that we are in a 3D matrix and that we are creating reality around us, because our mind cannot comprehend it. But we create through having or playing a video game or having our mobile phones. We create within the illusion. We create illusions to create illusions. It's crazy when I see all these VR things and how we are moving more and more away from ourselves into more illusion.
Well, and I think the other part that is really hard for us to comprehend, to wrap our human minds around, is that we inhabit or incarnate all of those timelines. For me, that's the hard part is, it seems like I am a single point of consciousness and I am focused on the now moment, every now moment, right? It just seems like that's what's real, that's what's true. And yet, when I back way up and look at it, I realize that simultaneously, I am such a giant consciousness that I am actually going in and having a focused point on each of these timelines.
Mm.
It's just hard for me to wrap my mind around. And yet I've experienced enough that I know it's true for me.
Yeah. You said that you have a session to share, a session story.
Yeah. An alternate timeline reality, which, there's so many authors out there and movie makers who have made stories, they think they're making up stories on alternate realities, like what if one of my favorites to look at is what if early America, the settlers, did not win the war with England, right? My country and your country, essentially. What if we were still ruled by England, And I think that's such a fun thing to look at. What would that mean for us? And that kind of stuff. But this story, the session story, is along those lines. It really felt like such an alternate reality. So this client had come because she had a lot of head pain and issues, especially in her teeth and in her jaw. She just had a lifetime of a lot of these issues going on. And so I took her to the original source point of those issues, and she ended up as a white male living in a small settlement here on this continent, and it felt very mid 1900s, not because of the way anything looked. That's just the feeling of the time period that this was in. So it was a small settlement of about 25 people, and they were living in these really old kind of falling down buildings that looked like they were built in the 1800s or something. They didn't have enough to eat. They didn't have very many skills. Some of them were alcoholics. It was a very low frequency type of a dynamic, a lot of abuse and just not a good living situation. So this client, this young male, ran away as about a 15-year-old boy, ran away from that white settlement and he traveled for several days and he ended up in this Native American town. And this Native American town was quite large. It wasn't huge. I would say it was maybe 1,000 people or a couple thousand people. But it too, felt very mid 1900s, and they were very prosperous. They lived in adobe style buildings, but they were large buildings. They were very much like the pueblos, the ruins of pueblos that we still have, but they were newer and nicer and, adobe and tall. They were several stories tall. They had big courtyards, animals, gardens. They just lived very well. They had a beautiful community where everybody had an assigned role or job or contribution to the whole. And so they took this boy in and, assigned him after they found out what his talents were, what he liked doing. They assigned him a role and he lived there and eventually married and had children. Well, then, as a young man, he was about 22, he decided to travel back to his family because he wanted to kind of rescue his mother and his sister. He ran away because primarily he was being very abused by his stepfather. So he wanted to go back and rescue his mother and his sister, and then any of the rest of the community that wanted to have a better life. So he took this big wagon full of goods with him and he traveled the several days. And the story actually does not end well. I mean, the stepfather actually beat him to death, about, shattered his jaw and a lot of head trauma. So he ended up dying because he went back to try to rescue them. But the feel of this session was so bizarre because it was definitely what would have happened had we had the Native Americans not been, so wiped out, their culture and their lands taken away, and really all means of prosperity taken away. It was a glimpse into what would it have looked like, perhaps, on one of these timelines. It was fascinating.
I was having a little discussion as well about your Atlantis books. Like, how would it have been like to live in Atlantis? And who knows? I feel like possibly all of us have had a life in Atlantis and we've had that experience. If we see that as a past life, right? And we see time as linear and we're in the now. So every time we think of our past, the past, right? I feel this is the case every time I think of a bad experience or a good experience. What I'm doing now is I'm bringing it back into the present, right? And the more we do that as well, do we recreate the same scenarios and situations and lessons that we now have to overcome. Until we learn the lesson, we're going to keep recreating that as well. So could that also be an example of timelines?
Yeah, that's a fascinating thought. I'll have to chew on that one a while. That's a good one.
Yeah.
When you say Atlantis, it made me think how, thousands and thousands of clients have seen a lifetime in Atlantis or several lifetimes in Atlantis. And even they've seen the final ending of Atlantis in a lot of different ways. And I just think that also is different timelines, right? What they're looking at, or any significant, like the lifetime of Jesus. You get clients, or you read books, all these people that tell very different stories of the Jesus lifetime. And I'm just like, is that different timelines?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So again, if you look at Atlantis, that is a big timeline, right? Now, would we say if we as an individual bring little reoccurring lessons from the past back to the present now, are we doing that now with our current situation? Are we recreating that just in a different scenario, right? And that's not exactly the same lessons, but similar lessons. If you read into the history of Atlantis and the fall of that, maybe even the same as Lemuria, that is another fallen civilization. And again, it's just like, is this the way humanity is overcoming their lessons, trying to make different choices to ascend? Do you feel everything we do is to ascend or just to have an experience?
I think it depends on the person and on the soul and what their goal is. I think ultimately source is expanding through all of these infinite amounts of timelines as well as lifetimes. Because you have all the lifetimes, we have different personalities, are different people in, and then within each lifetime you have all the timelines. And that's a lot of information. That is a lot of experience. And yes, ultimately we ascend along the way, and then we have more experiencing beyond ascending from one level to the next each time. But I think ultimately it's not only expanding our soul, but expanding, the collectives we're part of, and expanding source consciousness. I think that's the why all of it ultimately.
Yes. Yeah, I would say that resonates. Before we started, we went over some Q&As we wanted to ask and discuss. And I brought a subject with regards to organic and inorganic timelines to you, right? So the way I see that organic and inorganic is, I feel like when we create from our heart space, or when we create energetically for ourselves, I feel then we are creating organically, because we are choosing as creators what we would like to experience. Ultimately, there is a bigger picture, and I feel like inorganically we are affected by world events and things that are out of our control. Now, yet, I still feel like we have the power, though, to create that timeline that we want as a collective. Like, for example, if we see, I know it's not necessarily a topic I'd like to discuss, but if we see everything that's happening now, like, for example, vaccine passports, now I would rather say to myself, I would like, even though that's an inorganic timeline that everyone needs to experience, I could still say that I would like to experience a timeline where that is not the case, and still hold the power and the light within me, putting the energy out there to say that is the timeline I would like to create. So therefore, if a lot of people collectively become a consciousness to shift that timeline, I would hope to think that that would happen. So what is your point of view? I know this is very new to you with regards to what you feel is organic, creating from self, and inorganic that is imposed upon us, that we feel we have no control over. Because as a source being, I feel like we do create wholeheartedly. We don't create half-heartedly.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, I think that we also choose to be inside of control, to be controlled by outside forces, you know. I think we experience across many timelines that are part of that picture, being part of the matrix or being part of any system of control. I think that a lot of us choose that across a certain amount of our timelines, and I think a lot of us choose to be outside of that across a lot of our timelines. So, absolutely, I would say this last year, 2020, for me, has been a very different experience than it has for pretty much everybody I've talked to or known. Because my focus of consciousness has been on a very free timeline. I have not felt the constraints. I have not felt the control. I have very rarely encountered, um, any of my freedom being imposed upon or taken away. And yet I know it's very, very real to most of the people that I interact with, where they have experiences every day of their control being taken away and things being imposed upon them. So yes, absolutely. I think it's all a matter of choices our soul has made. And I think it's fascinating that we can even look in on, say we are feeling inside of a timeline that is heavily controlled by outside forces. I think it'd be fascinating concept to sit down in meditation and look at what it would be like to not be inside of that heavy control, and vice versa. You know, I already get a lot of viewpoints because of all the conversations I have with clients and family and friends and that are feeling heavily controlled. I just don't. I haven't. I traveled more in 2020 than I have any other year of my life. I don't wear masks. I don't get vaccinations. And I just don't encounter resistance to that. So while that's my reality, I realize that's not the reality of a lot of other people. It's a good example of timelines.
It's absolutely. But it's also about those people you're speaking to, how much focus is on that, what they don't want. Again,
yes. Talk more about that, Priscilla.
Right? So we keep focusing on what we don't want instead of what we want. And I've caught myself having conversations with me in my mind saying that I don't want this, right? But then I'm focusing on what I don't want instead of saying this is what I want. And when we focus on what we want, I feel that is a belief that comes in, because it's, who am I to say what I do want? Who says I'm worthy of having that thing, of what I want? It is just so much easier to fall into a negative frame of mind than a positive, and seeing our own worth, seeing our own value, saying that I can achieve this thing that I would like to see for myself. So I feel like it does touch upon the category of the law of attraction. You know, what you resist persists.
Absolutely. Wherever you're putting your thoughts, your actions, your words, and your energy is what is going to be real for you. My favorite quote around the law of attraction and creating your life is, we attract what we believe, not what we ask for. So my work has been for the last little while on really examining and swapping out beliefs, because that is actually what we create from, is our beliefs.
That's right. Beliefs is a big thing because we are so trained into it from such a young age. So when you begin to awaken or reawaken and start to question your reality, it's as if you have to unlearn everything that you've learned.
Deprogram. I use the word programming a lot because that's what it feels like. We were not only genetically carrying the programs of our ancestors, but then from early childhood, we are programmed with everything, how to view the outside world, how to view ourselves, how to view relationships, everything that's part of human life. We're programmed with these things. And until we become conscious of what our programs are and then start to do the work of changing them, until that happens, we're just living from our default programs.
Right. Yeah. And I noticed belief systems when they come in, programming, like I have to do this because it is the right thing to do. It may not be, but it may be the right thing for you to do. So therefore it makes you feel good, and that's why you're going to be doing it. Again, it feels bad to do a wrong thing, to steal something, to take something from someone else. So you don't do it because it's going to make you feel bad. And therefore it's all a belief, but it's our conscious, right? What we can live with, but at the same time, it is what is taught to us of what's right and wrong. Beheadings and the way we killed people back in the day, that was deemed okay, but now all of a sudden it's not. So it's all a change with time, how things seem to be okay and not okay, how we treat people, how we treat ourselves. So yeah, it's all beliefs on what you believe is the right thing to do.
Absolutely. And it's helpful to me to get neutral to all of that. Because of course I think my beliefs are more right than other people's beliefs. But when I get neutral to that and I can stop thinking that I'm more right and my beliefs are more right, when I get very neutral, then my love for everybody, no matter what their beliefs are, can just expand and explode. And I can have true love for them, and I can treat people truly well when I get neutral and understand exactly what you just said. It's all beliefs, it's all constructs and ideas. And yet we need them. I had a conversation with somebody the other day about, it's not part of our human existence is having beliefs as a container for living. Like, we need some programs, we need some beliefs. The thing is, we get to choose. We get to choose what beliefs we want to have and what programs we want to be running.
Yeah.
So that's the fun part of it.
I know. I feel like it's like a rule. It's like the commandments, but they change through time.
Yes.
The rules have changed.
But a lot of people haven't, and they don't think that they have. They don't think the rules have changed.
But no, absolutely. Staying neutral for me as well, it just helps you see much clearer. You see different perspectives. So if you have one belief and you have that point of view, now you're not open to other beliefs because you've made up your mind to one point of view. And that is what you're sticking to. So you can't see any other point of view. Right? So staying neutral and open, it's always the best way. Yeah.
I have a fun topic to bring up along the timeline thing again. Is I had the thought of when Dolores Cannon was talking about old Earth and new Earth splitting, I started thinking, like, oh my goodness, was that all about timelines, or a set of timelines, basically, the Earth staying the same, not kind of stepping up into new dimensions and ascending. And so that set, you could say, of timelines that it just stays on. And then the new Earth, which takes off on these new sets of timelines, because it is moving into new dimensions and getting new energies. It's just funny. It popped into my mind, like, oh, that's kind of all about timelines too. What do you think?
Yeah, it's the way you look at it, because when we did the round table, for those who are watching or have seen it, or it will be coming up in the schedule. So when on the round table, I brought up the question with regards to collapsing of timelines. So I feel like because we're jumping timelines, is the old Earth, again, this inorganic timeline matrix system, and the new earth is where we're actually being enlightened, being awoken, or to wake up, and finding the truth of who we truly are, and that we are in control of our own lives, and we don't have to allow other people to control us. And we give our power away because it's like we do want to be led. We do want to be told what we need to be doing, because otherwise we feel lost. So when we regain that power of sovereignty and become enlightened, I feel the more we do that, we are actually becoming that new earth. So I explained it as a collapsing, but maybe not a collapsing, because I think, was it you or Aura that said it's actually a coming together?
Yeah, the collapsing timelines versus the converging timelines. And then say that last word you said, and then I explained about the what?
The tabs, all the tabs that are open on your
the
computer.
browser. Yeah, the browser windows being open. Yes.
So yes.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, working with timelines, and how we might be able to pop in and out of timelines, kind of like, having a lot of browser windows open and popping in and out of different pages and things like that.
But then ultimately coming together to something bigger.
Well, and that's a big question I have still about timelines. I have lots of questions, but that's a big one, is the convergence, I feel like there must be certain points in our lifetime where, okay, we have all these timelines happening at the same time, but then a lot of them or some of them converge, to add a choice node. Does that make sense? So it's kind of, they go, blah, they spread, and then do some of them come back together, and converge and then spread. I don't know. I have a lot of questions about that.
I think that's fascinating, because when you said that, it's like split. So the first thing that came to mind about relationships is splitting, right? And friendships, and you're going on your own path. But how many times do you hear them coming together? People reconnecting, remarrying, friendships reconnecting. So I do feel like they do come back together. Why? Don't know. But I've heard of many stories of, oh, we were married and then we separated for 10, 15 years and here we are again.
Yeah.
I think it's circumstances. When I read a story about Auschwitz, the German camps, and this lady called Edith Eger, I think her name was. She was telling her story about how she survived the camps, and how when she escaped, she met this man. It wasn't the man of her dreams that she met before all of the unfoldings, but she met this man, and he was good to her, and they basically finding each other helped escape the country that they were in to make a new life in America, right? And she tells this amazing story of how they got married, how they had children, but yet she still felt so unfulfilled because she was a ballet dancer, and there was so much more to her, and she's basically shut all of that down. And she made the decision, and a hard decision, to let go of this husband and say, listen, this isn't working. I'm feeling down. I'm feeling depressed. I'm not myself. And they separated, right? So she could live the life that she wanted for herself. As well, that earlier when I said sometimes people make choices that you don't want and something you have to live with, right? Because you have no control over that. And he went off and he met an American lady, and she was still single, and she had to see him meeting someone else, and it didn't work. So he said to her, "Can we meet up for a coffee or whatever?" And they met up again. And she said, "Well, I thought you were happy." And he said, "Well, it's not you. It's not you can't create this environment of home. You are home. You create the traditional food. You create everything that I miss and love, right?" And they fell in love again. But only this time it was real love, and not just out of necessity or to get out of a difficult situation. And that, I felt that was fascinating in the way of coming together, because it was survival, splitting off to find themselves, and then coming back more whole as a unit.
That's such a beautiful story.
It is. Yeah, it was a very interesting and inspiring book. She telling her story of the difficulty she went through, and it's also inspiring because again, it's history. Is history repeating itself in a different way? What can I learn about what's happened in the past and creating better situations and scenarios for myself? Earlier, I said before we started recording, I said to you how we continue reacting on situations that happen for us in our life. We're constantly reacting instead of actively creating, allowing things to just happen to you and you just continuing accepting it. And then, okay, what's my next step? Okay, this has just happened. What's my next step? Just stop and say, well, how do I want to create? Again, back to the beginning when we started our discussion on how we want to create for ourselves. But I want you to also recognize the fact when we are reacting continuously because we feel powerless, what can we do to gain that power back, our control back? So we feel we have control over our lives.
Yeah, I think again, it goes back to what I call our default programming. We just live out of that, and that's when we're reactive and we don't feel like we're creating. We don't feel like we have what we want. We don't feel like we have any power. I think it again goes back to the beliefs and the programs that we're running. And I think that's also the key to changing that is examining what do I really want and what's going to have to change in my belief system and what's going to have to change in my habits and my thoughts and my daily actions to get from here to there.
When we're constantly distracted, we don't allow ourselves to be inspired. That's why you're inspired when you're in the shower. That's why you're inspired when you walk on the beach, because you allow yourself to be taken away to a place where you can delve into the bigger part of you and examine your life and think, and you have role play that's happening in your mind because we're always constantly thinking, and we wonder why inspiration comes in the most awkward times because we can't write it down, right? And it's distraction. We're in a world that we're so constantly distracted, procrastinating, that we don't have the tools. That's what I wanted to say. See, we don't have the tools to know how to create.
Yeah, and what I think about as you're talking about all of that is for me, it's the difference between going within, having my focus be within in the vastness of who I really am, versus having my focus be on everything outside of me, all those distractions, all those things that are just filling up my mind and my day. And it's not doesn't have that much to do with me. It's happening around me, and yet it's so distracting. I think of so many people that I know that they go to work and work a job and then they come home and watch TV all evening and then they get up the next day and they do it again. And they just live these lives that are 100% focused outside of themselves and they don't know who they are. They don't even begin to tap into the vastness of the spirit or the soul that they are. They just think the life and the world is only about all these things happening outside of them.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of the difference of what you're talking about is, letting go of that stuff, or to the extent that you can, moving your focus or the importance away from all that and placing the importance and your focus within. Who am I really? What all do I include, and start to explore that in whatever way sounds good. For some people, it's meditation. For some, it's hiking. For some, it's religion. It can go on and on and on. Learning, growth, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Healing. God, a lot of us focus outside because what's inside right now is a lot of brokenness or a lot of trauma or a lot of things we don't want to look at. So sometimes healing is the first step to wanting to, or even beginning to be able to focus inside.
Healing is big. Healing's a big one.
It's a big one. It's one that we all share, I think. I think to some extent all of us have healing work to do. Every human. I had another session story. It's a really short one. but having to do with timelines and how we can use them. Is it a good time to talk about ways that we can use working with timelines?
I think that's a great way to kind of end this little beautiful chat we've been having.
Okay. So I had a client recently, and she had been in a relationship. She had this man where they had a beautiful soul connection, like a really deep soul connection. Even when they were both married to other people, they were friends and they knew they had this deeper soul connection. And then eventually they got together and they were together for a while, but then she walked away from it for various reasons. And so one of her questions in the session was, wanting to know, if it was the right thing to do, basically, to walk away from that relationship. And so it was interesting and it shocked me because I wasn't expecting it, and I'm sure she wasn't expecting it. But she actually got shown a future timeline if she had stayed with him. So they took her to this little house in the high desert where her and this man lived. They had gotten married and they had had a baby. And her children, she had children, this client had children from a previous marriage, and her children were there visiting. And so she's kind of looking at, she's like, I'm not really all that happy. Like, I'm happy about the baby, but this man and my children don't really jive. It's not that their relationship is horrible, but he just doesn't care about them to the level that I want him to, and they're not really enthralled with him either. So she got to really deeply look at and feel what it would have been like had she stayed with this person and married him. And I thought, God, that's just brilliant. How fascinating that that's what her higher self chose to show her to answer her question. Because she was kind of like, if we're supposed to be together, I will go back to him, because she still loves him. But there was just a few things that she felt were off. So, what a great answer.
The best thing sometimes, deep within you, you will already know the answer. If there's doubt, leave it out. So I feel when something's off and something isn't working, it takes two people to make something work. And oftentimes it's better to just walk away. But most importantly, growth can also happen individually instead of the togetherness, because the more you spend time together, you kind of lose your individuality. So breaking away, having your own experiences, and then coming back together, if that is still the case, you have so much more to talk about, because now you've gone out and you've had experiences that you can share with each other that wasn't done together. So innately, I think you will know what the right thing is for you. And if not, take a break and see what it tells you, how it speaks to you.
Yeah. Well, and I just thought that was an example of, that timeline where she did stay with him it's there. Like, it's completely fleshed out. She got to go see it in entirety, in its completeness. It wasn't like a little what if vision popping into a moment. Like, that timeline exists,
Goosebumps. I just got goosebumps. Yes, confirmation. Goosebumps. It's truth bumps. Yeah.
It's so wild. Yeah. And yes, I love your relationship advice and making decisions. I think you're right on.
Yeah. It's the most difficult thing, because being in an unhappy situation, again, it is that not being able to visualize the future and being scared and fearful of what is waiting for you. So you rather stay in an unhappy place because that is what you are familiar with, rather than letting it go into something that's the unknown. It's the unknown that people fear.
Yeah. Well, and then somebody I'm very close to who is dating right now. She's on Match.com, some of those dating sites, and she doesn't want to kind of waste time, with people. I don't mean that in a bad way, because she is fine with a friendship or a relationship, but she wants it to be of substance, and she wants it to be a whole new level, meeting her where she is now at her point of evolution. And so she doesn't want to go through all this nonsense, right? It just takes time to get to know people. So she's actually using this tool of looking ahead in timelines when she kind of encounters a person that has, has hints that he might be able to meet her spiritually, or be able to understand a lot of things that she's living inside of right now. She's actually used this tool where she looks ahead at the timeline to see if they are truly compatible or not. it's pretty powerful.
All you need is an intention. Set the intention and anything's possible. If you think about everything as energy, time is energy, right? And you can tap into anything, create anything, manifest anything.
As well, I think it's fascinating because I love history. Like, I love history. And I think it's fascinating to look back at all the alternate timelines of history. There's the history we are told, and then there's all the histories that we find through session work, and then there's histories kind of hidden or stolen history that we're not supposed to know about. There's all these different things, and I think it's fascinating to go back and, like, for instance, the lifetimes of Jesus as an example. What would it look like to go and say, okay, I want to see one version of this. Okay, I want to see another version of this. Okay, I want to see another version of this. And with taking any time period or any event, we can do that.
Just that story alone is fascinating because of the history behind it and how it's being reported and what we know, and then being able to do the work we do and exploring different puzzle pieces that was left out in a way. But no.
Or even like some of our American presidents, it's really hard to look at what we've been told about them and determine if they are really positively oriented or negatively oriented. And I'm sure there's timelines where they're both, right? I'm sure there's timelines where they've been negatively oriented. Take any given president, JFK, for instance. I'm sure there's things that were negatively oriented and things that were positively. So just knowing that we have this tool, this consciousness exploration tool, where we can go and look at some of that,
Yeah. And quantum healing is a great way to do that. So thank you very much for talking to me today, Donna. I really, really enjoyed exploring these questions with you and these concepts and examples. It is priceless. They give you so much to think about and hold so much value.
Thank you, Priscilla. It's always a pleasure to talk to you. I love your big, huge brain that just goes on and on and on.
Big brain. I don't know what brain you're seeing. Thank you. And I do hope that people who are watching it found some value in it too. And please do contact us if you have any questions or would just want to connect with us individually. A big thank you to Quantum Healers. Go check out quantumhealers.com for a huge directory of healers of all kinds, of all modalities. Go have a look to see what's there. You may just surprise yourself. So thank you very much. Goodbye.